Hi, this is Jason from Effective Dashboards, and in this video we are going to talk about data transformation. And the scenario that I've got here is one where we've got information and a history of KPI information in Power BI, in Excel, and we want to pull that information into Power BI. So let's start with the scenario here. So we've got a dashboard in Excel, and we can see here this dashboard is configured to look reasonably good. It's designed to be printed or to be displayed on a screen, maybe printed on A3 or A4 landscape. It's got section headers, it's got the underlying KPI values for these, it's got some targets, a trend, and it's got some historical information going back over the last 12 weeks. So this is typically the front page of a KPI sheet, and it may have much more information on it than this. This is just an example here. Now behind this there is the actual data. So we don't have the data that makes up each one of these figures. Now this is just random data. If we talk about KPIs and schedule attainment, well, we can't really get anything above 100%. I've just put some random values in here. However, this data is typically built up over time by some sort of report that would be run at the end of each week, and you may just input that information in manually. So this would be a basic report that is part of an analyst's role, just to pull that information in. And this would be in a situation where you typically don't have a data warehouse. Maybe your systems are your systems are maturing, and over time you've built up this history. So you don't want to lose this history, and you want to pull it into Power BI. However, the format that the data is in just now is not really conducive to building KPI dashboards. So we're going to go through the steps to format this data using Power Query, which is one of the tools within Power BI. We're going to use a couple of functions within that, a couple of options that Power Query offers, which is Transpose and UN-PIVOT. And I'm going to show you exactly how to get this information into Power BI and start building some visuals. Okay, so I've opened up a Power BI desktop file, and this is a file we're going to be working with. I've called this Maintenance KPI Dashboard V1, and we are going to import the data. So we go to Excel, import data from Excel, and we've got our sheet that has the underlying data and the dashboard. So we are going to import the data input sheet, and that's the right sheet we can see there because it's got the KPIs, it's got the dates, etc. So we're going to go to transform data. So you might need to do something similar to this. It might be slightly different in terms of the actual data transformation, but the pivot and transpose functions we're going to use is going to be the same. So bear in mind that some of the columns and some of the rows you need to get rid of might be slightly different depending on how the data is structured, but the principles and the concepts will be the same for data that's structured just like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and explain how we want the data to look. So start with the end in mind. So this is our row-based schema. So what we want to end up with is 3 columns. The first column is going to be the date. The second column is going to be the KPI name. And the third column is going to be the KPI value. So rather than having the date along the top and the KPIs along the rows, we are going to transpose the data to get into this format, but we've also got to unpivot the data as well. And I'll go through each one of those steps in detail. But this is what we need. We need the date, we need a KPI name, and then that column will be the name of each KPI, and then the KPI value. And this will be the value of that KPI on that date. Okay. So back to transform the data. So the first thing we're going to do is we've got 2 rows that we don't need at the start of the data. So we're going to remove these. And one of the things that I like to bear in mind is that we should try and make it as future-proof as possible. So if any new data gets added, and by new data we're going to be talking about extra KPIs added in here perhaps, and certainly new data added for columns as we expand the columns with additional weeks. So we need to bear that in mind. These data columns here are this is just a number to represent each one of the KPIs, and this one is just a blank spacer, so we can get rid of these first 2 columns and they will always be column 1 and column 2, which is fine. So we can get rid of these by simply clicking each one of the columns with the control, and then we just go to remove columns and remove columns. Okay, so the next one we need to get rid of is this target. Now, I would rather get rid of something that was called with a column name called target rather than column 4. And the reason for that is if we did ever start to add in additional columns after the KPI and before the target, then it would be called column 4, and it would get rid of that column instead of the target column. So whenever possible, we want to name the columns that we want to get rid of. So to do that, we first of all use this option here, use first row as headers, and now each of these columns that were the first row are now headers. And then we go into, rather than remove columns, we go to choose columns. And this is where we choose the columns that we want to keep or get rid of. So we don't want this column here. We want to keep all the dates for just now. So we're going to click on that. Okay. And that has a number of different advantages. The first one is that we are removing a specific column. The second is that if you need to go and change it at any point, there's a little cog here. If you double click on that, you can go back and you can actually change the columns that you've got rid of. There's this one here, remove columns, just removes those first two columns. If you click on here, it will tell you which ones you're removing, column 1 and column 2, but this is a lot easier, this one here. Okay, so that's fine. The next thing we need to do is get rid of a few rows. So the week number and this is just a maintenance KPI. So this is just a spacer for the actual for the columns for this left-hand column here. So we don't really need those first two rows. So to get rid of those, we're going to go remove rows, and we're going to remove the top rows. So there's an option here to remove a number of rows from the top, or remove a number of rows from the bottom. And there's a few of those as well that we'll come to in a second. So let's remove top rows, and we want to remove the top 2 rows here. Now the other thing we have is we've got these blank or null rows here. So these are ones we also want to get rid of. So we can go and remove rows, and there's an option here to remove blank rows. And that's starting to take shape a little bit now. So now we've got these rows here. We're going to keep these ones for just now. These are sort of section headers. They can come in handy. So we'll leave these in for the time being. Even though they will have null values, I'm going to leave them in. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is get the data. Now, if you remember, we've got to get the data into the dates being the left-hand column, or being the rows, rather than column headers. So let's use the transpose. So we want to get those as column headers. So we go to transform, and we are going to transpose the data. So let's click transpose. So I'd like you to see this, because this is how not to do it. And what we've done here is we've transposed the data, but it hasn't worked for some reason. Now the reason for that is that we have not transposed the rows, the columns. We've transposed the actual first column, not the actual column headers. So let's remove the transpose table option. So to undo a transformation, you can actually just go and delete it from this list here. So we undo that. And what we need to do is we need to demote these headers to be the first row. Okay, so we go up to the top here, and we're going to use the header as first row. And then we're going to transpose the data. So now we can see we've got exactly what we need here. We've got the rows as the week ending, and now we've got the KPIs along the top. So next we need to get this headers again back up into the header, the column headers, or this first row up in the column headers. So we're going to use this again, and now we've got the data looking pretty good. So finally, this is not going to be exactly what we need, because if we import this data, it's going to create a KPI It's now going to create the information exactly how we want it. Let's just show you that. So how that's going to work is it's now created a column for each KPI. Now that is not what we actually need. We need these columns to be in the format that we talked about earlier on. So let's go back to our transform data, and this is where the unpivot option comes in. So we're going to go into transform, and we're going to use this option here called unpivot columns. So we're going to select the first column, and there's a few options in here, but we want to unpivot other columns. And what that's going to do is it's going to add 2 additional fields. It's going to add a field for an attribute, which is going to be the KPI name, which is each one of these. And then it's going to add every value that's in this data set here into a separate field for basically for each of the actual date ending. So we're going to end up with 3 columns, and we're going to have a date, and then for each KPI we're going to have an attribute, which is going to be the KPI name, and we're going to have a value. So we've got the date, the KPI name, and the value. So let's just show you how that works. Unpivot other columns. So here we have it. So we've got the 1st of the 10th, and here are all the values on the 1st of the 10th. So these fields have been added. So we're going to go and just rename those fields. Call that one KPI name, and we're going to call this one KPI value. And we are going to just confirm. Okay, so the week end date is, we're just going to play with the data types, make sure they're okay. So if we click on here, we can see that data type is any. So it's really saying that it's undefined. That's what that ABC123 means. So we're going to go and change the data type, and we want that to be a date for sure. Now that's a date, and we can see that it's got a calendar symbol there. ABC is text, and we're happy with that. And the KPI value, now we want that to be a number. So again, this is that any type, which means it's unsure what that is. So Power BI will attempt to assign the most relevant data type to this. So we're going to go in here, and we're going to call this a decimal number. And then we can see that that's changed to a decimal number. A few of these have got lots of decimal places, probably about 8 or 9 decimal places. We don't need that. We only need it to 2 decimal places. So we're also going to change the rounding, and we're going to round to 2 decimal places. Okay, so we're now ready to load this data. So we're going to close and apply. And here we have it. So we've got our data in the format that we need. So let's go and start creating some visualizations. Okay, so the first thing I am going to do is create a line graph. So we've got all the information we need. So let's add in a line graph, and we're going to add a graph in here for schedule attainment, just as a scenario to get us started. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. The easy way to do it, I'll show you that first. So let's add in the axis. I would say it's a quick way to do it. And we'll put in the value, and we can see here there's values here, but that's a value for everything. So then we need to add in the KPI name as a filter. So add it into the visualization filter, and we are only interested in the one for schedule attainment. Right, here we go. So this is now for schedule attainment. We could add a new title here, etc, but that's got the information we need. So that's okay, that's fine. This KPI value here, the measure is not explicit, it's implicit. It's using this example here where we can assign a sum or an average to the value directly in the measure, or in the visualization. However, what we want to do is we want to have a little bit of flexibility. So we don't want to have to deal with these filters. It can get a little bit difficult to manage if you've got filters applied to different visualizations. And again, we want to get a measure to actually calculate the value, which is pretty straightforward. So we're going to go and add a new measure. And we're going to call this measure overall schedule attainment percentage. So just keep it the same as the name. And we're going to use the calculate function. And the expression we're going to calculate is going to be the sum of the KPI value. And so remember, calculate takes an expression and then a filter. So calculate is going to remove the filter context and apply a new filter onto this sum here, or the expression. So we're going to go, and the next value down is going to be a filter. So we only want to sum the KPI values for instances where the KPI name is equal to overall SA percentage. So my recommendation would be that you create a measure for every KPI that you want to track that was pulled in through that initial sheet. Now that's going to take a little bit of time, but it's well worth it in the end, because now we can get rid of this value here. We can pull in the KPI value, and we can see we've got that exact value there. We can get rid of the filter, and the filter's already defined within the measure, so we don't need to apply a filter to this particular visualization. It's already there, and we can reuse this measure without having to go and apply filters to each visualization. So if I wanted to show that as a table as well, for example, so let's add in a table here, and we just need to add in the schedule attainment, and we need to add in the week, and we can see it's appearing in there. So we could change this around, but you get the idea. So we don't need to go and add the filter in each time, and we can mix and match. So we could add additional measures into the same the same table or the same graph, which can be useful if we're grouping things that are similar, and we want to be able to draw a comparison or draw some sort of correlation between the two of them. So the other thing that we can do if we define each one as a measure is that we can assign a different data type or format to each one of these measures. So the value format, we define that as a decimal, which is fine because we want that underlying value to be a number, and the number allows us to pull it into visualizations and sum and average and max and min, etc. These values. However, some of the values are percentages and some of the values are numbers. So we want the flexibility to be able to present this as an actual percentage. Just now it's a number. So we go back into our schedule attainment, and we're just going to change the format to a percentage. 2 decimal places is fine as a default. And if we move this up, we can see that now this is now defaulted to a percentage. We can see there's a percentage here. And in fact, actually, 0 decimal places is probably relevant because I think that's the underlying data for this one here. And once that updates, we will see the update. Here we go. And we can see that that information is updated. Okay, so hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you've got now an idea about how you would go about pulling that information into Power BI, that history that you've got in Excel. Now obviously in the longer term you'd want that information to be in a database and controlled, but you are where you are, and sometimes you've got to work with the data that you've got. It means you could probably do this without any input from IT, which can sometimes be a little bit of a blocker depending on how much and how busy those guys are. As an analyst you can do it yourself, and you can start to build the information in Power BI, the graphs, the tables, the matrices, and you can also publish this to the Power BI service. And that's a big advantage in Power BI, is that you can share that information with people through a web page through the Power BI service. Okay, so if you like this video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you want to keep up to date with the next video in this series and any other videos that I release, I will be releasing a few other videos in this series here.
then hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified whenever I release some new material, which is roughly every week. Okay, thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next video.